This is a webinar series that occurs on the first Wednesday of each month. And we will be bringing experts to you from the field to talk about various aspects of watershed topics and provide opportunities for you to learn something new and to ask questions over your lunch hour. My name is Mary Ellen Shane. I am a senior watershed planning and project coordinator here with the NSWA, and it is my pleasure to be your host this hour. So before we begin, we will be, we're going to be talking about drought today in this webinar. But before we begin, we're going to be looking at some housekeeping items here. So first of all, the webinar today will be recorded. And that we ask you to keep your microphones muted and turned off during the presentations, but there will be a chance for you to ask questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and then we will get to those Q&As at the end. We also ask that we will be sending you a feedback survey at the end of this at the end of today's session to get your feedback on what you thought about it. And I promise you, we use this information in order to improve the workshops in the future. So, and if you stay till the end, we will be giving a draw out for a Watershed Wednesday gift basket, which includes these items that you see here, including a copy of our Living in the Shed, some bumper stickers that say that you love the North Saskatchewan River, some other forms of stickers, and some riparian web portal swag as well. And we'll be drawing a name at random at the end. So I'd like to start today's meeting in a good way by beginning with a land acknowledgement. In the spirit of respect and reciprocity, we acknowledge that the lands within the watershed of the North Saskatchewan River are in Treaty 6, Treaty 8, and the Métis homeland. And these lands are the traditional territories and traveling routes and gathering places of the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, Stoney, Nakota Sioux, and it's also home to one of the largest communities of Inuit south of the 60th parallel. We recognize the contributions of Indigenous people who have cared for this land since time immemorial and whose rich histories, cultures, language, and presence continue to enrich these sacred lands that we all steward as treaty people. The NSWA recognizes the role of watershed management and its practitioners in perpetuating a colonial system by excluding and ignoring perspectives offered by Indigenous culture and science. And we make this statement as an affirmation that we are committed to improving this relationship in watershed stewardship. So we're gathered today to speak about how we can build resilience towards drought, which is an issue that affects and unites us all. And I would be remiss not to acknowledge that although most Canadians have enjoyed easy access to drinking water, this hasn't been and continues to be a difficult situation for many First Nations communities across Canada. And as we, as Albertans, prepare for a potentially difficult summer of drought, it is imperative that we include First Nations in discussions about drought, planning, and resilience. As we are all treaty people with a responsibility to care for each other and for this land. Alberta is currently in stage 4 out of 5 of its water shortage management response system, which means that there are several different regions across the province that are experiencing drought at the same time. And this is particularly dire in the south, where the low precipitation over the past year has left reservoirs quite low. We're all still waiting to see what the snow conditions will bring over the next few months. We're hoping for the best, but as a province, we're preparing for the worst by developing water sharing agreements between water users. So these are voluntary, highly collaborative processes that will require a lot of goodwill between rights holders and license holders. In our first presentation today, we're going to be learning about how modeling is used to facilitate those specific agreements in the South Basins. Drought conditions across the province are variable, and they're also variable across the North Saskatchewan River watershed. So precipitation, which comes in the form of snowpack in the headwaters of the NSR, is currently below average. We have 3 monitoring stations, 3 snowpack monitoring stations in our headwaters. You'll see those on the screen there. Currently, 2 are showing that they're below average, and one of them is above average in terms of annual snowpack. And so because of this, with some calculations, the government of Alberta is predicting that the natural flows of the North Saskatchewan River are expected to be lower than normal in 2024. But of course, our natural flows are controlled or augmented through the 2 power generating reservoirs that we have upstream. In the central and eastern regions of our watershed, precipitation was really low. It was below average in 2023, leading to some really dry soil moisture conditions. And this trend may continue throughout 2024, but it's really dependent on precipitation that we get in the next few months and over the summer. So creeks and lakes within the watershed may be affected by low precipitation in those areas, and they may be affected very differently from each other. And if you want to learn more about water forecasts, current water levels, and water shortage advisories, you can find all this information on the Alberta Rivers app, which is also listed there on the screen. So all municipalities across Alberta have been asked by the province to develop water shortage response plans. Industry has been asked to prepare as well for a possibility of water shortages. And these plans, they help communities prepare for the possibility of water shortage for any reason, including drought and also other causes such as source water contamination, water infrastructure failures, which is something that we experienced here in the NSR Basin recently. And in our second presentation today, we will hear from the City of Camrose, who has had a water shortage plan in place for a few years. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Robert Hough has been a project manager with WaterSMART for the past 5 years, and he's been involved with a collaborative water management projects throughout Alberta, including flood and drought planning in the South Saskatchewan River Basin. And outside of the office, he enjoys hiking and biking and canoeing the local rivers and lakes. Robert's going to be talking with us today about watershed modeling at that watershed scale, specific model called the SSROM, developed for the South Basins for the specific purpose of facilitating collaborative discussions between stakeholders for the benefit of those for enhanced water management. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will pass it over to Robert to share his.
Yeah, great. Thank you for the introduction. I'm just set up here. Okay, hopefully everyone can see the screen okay?
Yep, we're good to go.
Perfect. So yeah, as Mary-Ellen said, I'm going to be talking about a project, mostly talking about a recent project we've just completed in the South Saskatchewan River Basin using our SSROM model and a collaborative watershed management approach. So the presentation, I'll just talk a little bit about sort of collaborative watershed modeling and how we kind of get to that point, and then I'll go through some of the results. And I'm also going to touch on, some of you may know, WaterSMART is involved with the water sharing agreement development that's going on in the South Saskatchewan River Basin as well. So I can talk a little bit to that. I'll just touch on it right at the end as kind of time allows. So just thank you to everyone who funded the SROM Phase 3 project. And the SROM Phase 3 was the development of a water security roadmap. So it was a long-term planning exercise. And we had a great kind of set of funders and working group. And I'll talk a little bit about how we got everyone involved to kind of develop that water security roadmap and look at adaptation measures in the South Saskatchewan River Basin. So kind of why do we engage in collaborative watershed modeling? I mean, this quote kind of says it all. The people who know the water best are those who have waded through it, those who work in the basin. You know, you can't pretend to be an expert in everything. So bringing those experts in specific areas, experts in in the environment, in fisheries, in irrigation together, those who manage the system and operate the system, is really the best way to build a model. So models are tools. I always think of a model, it doesn't provide the answer, and data, what you get out is only as good as what you put in. So really putting as best data possible in is only possible when you kind of bring in that expertise. So what drove this work? This development of the SROM model has been it's been 15 plus years of development, and it was really born out the 2000 to 2001 drought in the South Saskatchewan River Basin, which was the worst in 800 years. And now we are set up to experience something similar. So maybe not the worst. Hopefully we'll get some more snow and it'll look good. But really, like, identifying those adaptations kind of going forward was really paramount, a kind of key lesson that came out of that drought. And this is just a graph of tree ring data that was put together by Dr. David Sarchin. And it really goes, it's the historical record of flow variation in the South Saskatchewan River Basin. And it really shows that the 20th century was a more stable, you can see my cursor, just this area was much more stable than we've seen previously. So maybe this is actually a return to normal. We're seeing more frequent low flows in the rivers, so we need to be able to adapt to that. And so it's really about, we have this water available, however much it might be in a given year, and then how do we kind of slice that pie? So we need water for the environment, we need water for people, for municipalities, we need water for food, and we need water for industry, and we need enough water to send to the other provinces to meet our transboundary obligations as well. So, like, how do we divide this water up, and what's the best way to make the most of the water that we have available, even in low flow years? And this just shows US Department of Energy study, and the black circles represent kind of the top water exporters, the top 10 there, and you can see the color change from red to green represents how crop yields are projected to change between now and 2050. So we can see that of those top kind of exporters of water as part of food growth and plant growth, we see a decrease in most of those top 10, the exception being Canada there as a whole, but Alberta specifically can see is one of the few that's going to increase in production. So that means an increased pressure on water supply from increased demand, potentially from irrigation and stop watering as well. So the challenge then is you have competing demands and a kind of fixed pot of water that you can draw from. And there's really two ways to approach that. Like, either you can kind of be disconnected and everyone can fight over what's left, or we can come together collaboratively and work together to make sure everyone makes the most of what's available. Personally, the second one appeals a little bit more. So that's really what we call it the SROM Phase 3, but we've also referred to it as the SSRB Adaptation Roadmap Project. That's why it's important. So in the Boa Red Deer and the Old Man South Sask basins, we're seeing increased demand for food, increased population growth, while supply largely remains the same. I have some climate data to present earlier from so later in the slides that we can see how climate change affects the flows as well, but it is impacted by climate change, and it provides those three systems provide a great deal of water for municipalities there. So it's really important we make the most of that. So what we did was we got together the working groups, so those funders that I presented at the beginning, as well as other water managers in the basin and water users, and we showed kind of the impacts of a changing climate, of historical flows at today's demands, what kind of pinch points are. And we really worked together to come up with some potential mitigations that could be investigated further. And we used the model, the SROM, to model those at a very conceptual level, make some comparisons and run some scenarios and see how they would be affected and how they can improve the system and the potential for water availability going forward. And the real goal, the key outcome of this project is to provide a roadmap. So it's basically guidance to government, to water managers and users towards an overall direction for water management. So identifying those things that can be done and really making a kind of action focused plan as to what to investigate next. So we looked at these options at a conceptual level, which ones should go forward to the next stage of, feasibility in the case of infrastructure, or how can a policy change, for example, be implemented to better manage the system. So it's really supposed to be, very action oriented and focus on like what steps can be taken. So the SSROM stands for the South Saskatchewan River Operational Model. It's a combination of 3 sub-basin models: the Red Deer River, the Bow River, and the Old Man South Saskatchewan Basin models. And we've built it upon data from the government. So we have all the license demands, license uses in the basin, and they are built into the model. And then we've also had input from key basin water managers as well to tell us what their actual use is. So for example, the City of Calgary, we would model their actual municipal use rather than their license demand, because they're not using their full license demand yet. Similarly with irrigation, we model what they actually use, but as well how they actually work together to manage their irrigation districts and irrigation systems. And SROM is really a decision support tool. So we use it as part of these facilitated discussions in the collaborative watershed management approach. The SROM doesn't necessarily, not everything can necessarily be modeled in SROM. For example, we don't look at water quality, it's really a water quantity model. But as part of that discussion, like in the collaborative kind of approach and the facilitated approach, you can really tease out those things that can't be modeled, and we can look at those separately. We can take those away as something to be investigated in the future. And then the SROM provides a kind of quantified analysis of those things, like water quantity, that can be modeled quite well. One of the great things about it is we can run it live. So when we're in a meeting with people, it has a kind of plain English language where our modelers can sit down and someone can tell them something, and then they can throw the code on the screen, and the participant can see what they're saying being input live. So it's very flexible to be used in that way. So that really helps the discussion. And this is just a picture of what it looks like overall. We can see there's some points of contact between the 3 basins, and that's represented by the blue stars. And then we also account for the confluence where everything crosses the border into Saskatchewan. So what our obligations are to meet the apportionment contributions over the border, so we can capture that in the model as well. And this is really, I won't spend too much time on this slide, but it's really a history of the SROM development. Some key points here is that we did a drought exercise in 2011 that was very focused on the Bow River. That was the model we had at the time. And we kind of did a live modeling exercise back then, very focused on the one basin. What happens if there's a drought in the Bow River Basin, and what would be the outcomes of that, what steps can be taken to manage that drought. We did a similar exercise in 2022 at the SSRB scale as well, where we walked through on a monthly basis, kind of live, like a fictional hypothetical severe drought. Luckily, the timing for that was good because now we're in one. And then as we go forward, so 2023, we have the assessment of strategic water management. So that's what we're talking about today, this roadmap development. And I'll also touch on, as I said, the drought emergency management support that we're undertaking with the GOA, which is very much a less strategic and more kind of focused on one single event as well. So this is the development of the roadmap itself. We had 79 participants. We're collectively putting in 1,450 hours of meeting attendance. We had 7 working group meetings. Just on this list, you can see some of the types of organizations we had involved. So we had the WPACs, we had irrigation involved, we had municipalities, both the major municipalities like City of Calgary and Lethbridge, but also some smaller municipalities and rural municipalities as well to get their key input. We also had Indigenous involvement, both on the side of kind of the Indigenous agricultural projects that are ongoing, and from making sure Indigenous water rights are being held up in the model. So great to have that input as well. And industry as well. So we had a few industry, our power, so TransAlta involved, and that's key to the discussion as well, because especially in the Bow Basin, the TransAlta system and how that's managed really impacts flows that are seen downstream. And again, I kind of gave a brief overview of this, but this is the data sets that were recently updated and are included in the SROM model. So, we have irrigation. In addition to that, what we get from the water resource management model from the government and the water managers themselves, we also have integrate data from Alberta agriculture's irrigation demand model as well. So that tells us crop mixes and what the kind of ideal demands are for those crops as well. And then this is really one of the key trends that we saw in the development of that roadmap model. So what I have here is climate change, and we had 12 climate change scenarios that were provided by the government of Alberta. And we chose to run 3 of the kind of worst case scenarios, which are the driest, warmest scenarios, through our SSROM model. The black line here, just grab the laser pointer. Okay. Yeah, so the black line here represents our historical average flow, as this is the Bow River near Cochrane. The gray kind of represents the historical range. And then the colored lines here, these gray lines represent some of the other climate scenarios that we didn't run. And then the colored lines, the red, the green, and the blue represents the ones that were run through our hydrological SSROM model. And the general trend, the key takeaway from this slide really is that we have the same amount of water overall. So you can see that peak freshet is roughly the same. It's kind of roughly the same volume of water throughout the year. So our annual average isn't going to change that much, but the key difference is we're seeing a much earlier freshet. So that shift is, between 2 to 4 weeks in this period, and it's kind of 4 and 5 weeks in this period, 2051 to 2080. So that really results in low late summer flows, and that's our key pinch point that we found in this project, is that having enough water in the late summer just creates very frequent recurring late summer shortages. So that was the thing that we really had to make sure was mitigated as part of this project. Okay, so on slide. So the other piece of this we did is we took some of the outcomes of our SSROM modeling, and then we also did an economic evaluation. So if you recall, I mentioned that the key outcome of this project is to provide a kind of stepwise plan and a kind of guidance which can be taken to government. And one of the key pieces of that is people are going to ask, okay, how much is this going to cost? And then what, is the economic benefit of that? And really, when you're trying to talk about mitigations and kind of environmental water management, the key pieces to value are environmental and social valuations. So making sure those are captured was very important. So we use a new methodology called ecometrics, which is a kind of accredited methodology. We work with the company's called Ecometrics as well, and we work with those guys to kind of value some of these some of these potential projects and mitigations is particularly important when you're talking about natural infrastructure. Very difficult to kind of come up with an economic valuation without taking environmental and social benefits into account. So really kind of that showed the value of it. So just to very briefly, very high level, talk through some of the key outcomes from this. So if we look on this is one of the climate scenarios that we ran, and if we look on the right hand side here, what we're showing in this top box is an irrigation district, Western irrigation district in this case, and their shortages. So a shortage is when a crop is asking for water and then it doesn't get the water it's asking for. So that would be in a given day, that's a recorded volume, and then we can see the cumulative volume over all the irrigated acres in that irrigation district. So you can see that when we run this climate scenario, we get lots of these spikes, which are bad, in the blue here. So this is actually representing a frequent risk of drought to this irrigation district. So very high risk here, potentially on the kind of borderline of not really viable as an irrigation district potentially as well. So this is not something they wouldn't want to see. And so in the red, this is after we put some of the mitigations in that we discussed with the working group. So those are widespread implementation of natural infrastructure, modifications to existing storage, new on-stream storage, new off-stream storage specific to irrigation districts, potentially modifying operations such as diversion rates, and some policy changes we looked at as well. And you can see that really eliminates that risk to this particular irrigation district. So I just picked one performance measure there to look at, where you can really see kind of the benefits of entering into this planning exercise like early on. You don't want to wait until this happens. We can do this now, and then we can make sure that's in place for if this climate scenario occurs in the future. The bottom plot, similarly in blue, you can see just the climate scenario on its own. This is a cumulative flow curve, so it's in cubic feet per second on the y-axis, and what it represents is the amount of time or the percentage of time that a flow occurs in the river. So in the blue, we basically want to see this go higher at the bottom end, so you can really see these low flows in the blue here are spending more time lower, so you're 10% spent at kind of, what's that, 900, 800 CFS. And then when we implement our mitigations, we can see that increases on the red line there. So we're spending more time at higher flow when we have some of these mitigations in place. So super important and helpful to be able to model that too. And then this is really the overall outcome of that project. We created this roadmap, which this identifies all the mitigations that we came up with. It shows whether they are localized, whether there's kind of sub-basin, so Boa, Red Deer, Old Man, or whether they have a basin-wide impact. And then on the kind of x-axis here, we have a very rough timeline of, if you just give the go-ahead, the green light on these projects right now, how long might they take to implement? So our level 1 is less than 2, and then it goes all the way up to over 20 years for some of these larger storages. And then a continuous implementation line at the top here, which is just, you need to start doing these now and you'll get a cumulative benefit over time. So some of the natural infrastructure projects, very localized benefits for one single project. However, widespread implementation of natural infrastructure can have a sub-basin wide effect. So trying to capture those things as well. And as I say, it's really to say, you can take this to your local decision maker, the government GOA decision maker, and say, okay, this is the project that I am advocating for. Here's the benefits of it. Here's what it can do for the river, and economically, here's kind of a ballpark of how much it could cost and also benefit the system. So really trying to get this upfront analysis done, so people can take this forward. And just I'm really conscious of time, so just very quickly, we are working on water sharing agreements, and we're using SROM to do that in the South Saskatchewan River Basin. We have large license holders involved who are voluntarily participating, much similar to that list, working group list I showed earlier. There's a lot of great involvement in this voluntary exercise, and we're really, this is obviously a slightly different use of SROM, but we're trying to make sure that, one of the actions that comes out of this in a drought is that, people agree to take a little less water so that overall there's more water available for all uses. And this is just a really quick overview of how we are going about that with the model. So we are modeling this kind of in a live setting with people actively kind of participating in a drought. So we're modeling actually a 2001 drought, and they walk through the process and see how that drought impacts the system, and they have a forecasting information, and they can make decisions about what a water sharing agreement looks like and how it would be implemented at each point in the system. And then at the end of the year, we can see the outcomes of that. So that was pretty much what I had to go through. I think these slides will get distributed after. So I have some references in here as well if anyone wants to see those. But that's everything from me. Hopefully not too behind schedule. Thanks.
No, I think we're good. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, that was a really great overview of how modeling can be used to help us understand the impact of a severe multi-year drought on water users at that basin-wide scale, and also what it might look like if we invested some adaptations well in advance to drought. And as you mentioned, some of these adaptation tools can really take a little while to implement, such as natural infrastructure, which can take a little while to get going. So it's really important for us to be assessing all of this stuff in advance, and really cool that you guys already had the model in place of this current drought, that it was so easy to help you put it in place for developing these water sharing agreements. Thank you so much. Next, we're going to be bringing in Jeremy Enarson to be talking about the City of Camrose's water shortage response plan. So this would be something that would come into effect if communities are asked to reduce the amount of water being used by their community, and how would that water get distributed would be something that could be addressed in a water shortage plan. So we've asked the City of Camrose to share a little bit about how they've structured that. So Jeremy Enarson, he started with the City of Camrose full-time in 2006. He oversees the engineering services department for the city, which gets him involved in all kinds of aspects of municipal engineering for the city, such as transportation, water, wastewater, storm drainage, asset management. And as part of this work, Jeremy has been involved with water planning and water management for the city for a number of years. And outside of work, Jeremy really enjoys spending time with his family and his church community, and also enjoys activities such as geocaching, volleyball, and disc golf, which I've still never tried. But I will pass it over to Jeremy to share your screen, and which you have already done. So take it away, Jeremy.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me as well?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for you guys' time. My name is Jeremy. I'm with the City of Camrose. And yeah, I'm pleased to be here to give you a little bit of an overview of the city's water shortage response plan and some of the other things that we've been doing over the years with respect to water management planning and whatnot. Advanced slide, please. There we go. Okay. So for those that are not familiar with where Camrose is, we're about an hour southeast of Edmonton. We're what I consider a small to mid-sized city. We're about just shy of 20,000 population with a fairly steady growth rate, about 1% roughly per year. Camrose gets its raw water from a small lake, which is called Dry Meat Lake, which is part of the Battle River Watershed. And the Dry Meat Lake is basically just a natural widening of the lake of the river itself. From there, the City of Camrose pumps its water from Dry Meat Lake to the city's water treatment plant, about 14 kilometers. The Battle River itself is quite small. obviously in comparison to the North Saskatchewan. But for our area in East Central Alberta, it's a fairly important river. It serves a number of communities, Camrose, Wetaskiwin, Wainwright, as well as there's a number of agricultural users and heavy industry, including power generation. Now, with the Battle River being prairie fed, 100% of its flow comes from snowmelt and from rainfall. We don't have any glaciers, any foothills drainage there as well. And so as a result, the Battle River is a very heavily allocated river that there's a relative lack of water available for any new licenses. So Camrose has been involved in dealing with water shortage and water planning, water management for a number of years, long since way before my time with the city. Back in the 1990s and 2000s, we had a variety of different public education initiatives out there. We even put together our own little water conservation mascot, which you can see on the screen there. His name is Wayne Drop. So we've just a lot of the information has been just sharing information on the city's website, putting on different water seminars or whatnot over the years. One of the more tangible things that we've been doing here for the last number of years, we've got a toilet rebate program, and over the years, it basically allows for the replacement of older, typically higher volume toilets with low flush models. As you can see there, we've seen a replacement of about 1,600, a little over 1,600 toilets to date. And we estimate that it's saving the residents within Camrose currently about $84,000 a year collectively on their water bills. Another area that we've been involved in is more on the bylaw and policy side of things. So back in 2006, administration put together a draft policy and a draft bylaw, and it's called the Water Conservation and Water Use Bylaw and Policy. And those were approved by City Council in 2006. So with respect to the bylaw itself, it's a relatively short document. There's a few key points that are involved in there. So first of all, it outlines that our city manager is the one that's ultimately responsible for either declaring states of water shortages or implementing various stages of water conservation within the city. So that's something that City Council has delegated down to our city manager. The bylaw itself outlines the rights of the city to conduct enforcement, as you can see there, or to impose fines. And so the way we have it is there's different fine structure for a residential user versus a non-residential user. And so the idea behind this is that if there is a water shortage that has been implemented, then the city has the right to impose fines on residential or non-residential users if they're not complying with those restrictions. And as the city progresses through the various stages of the water shortage, those fines would potentially increase as well. And finally, the bylaw, really what the other key item is that it enables the policy itself. So the policy is a separate document approved by council at the same time. And it gets into a lot more detail, as you can appreciate. So it's a little bit easier for us to also review and update. So some of the things that are within the policy there, as you can see there, are some of the reasons why we potentially would impose water restrictions. I thought it was interesting that Mary Ellen actually talked about that earlier in terms of mechanical issues, or there's a variety of different reasons. So we're here obviously to talk more about drought and water availability, but the city potentially might have other reasons for imposing water restrictions on its community. The policy also outlines that there's 4 different stages to the actual water conservation. We'll get into those into further slides. The policy outlines what people are allowed to do or what restrictions might be in place within each stage of the water restriction. And that's not only for the residents or businesses, but this is also outlines what the city is committing ourselves to doing. So if we get into one of those higher levels of water restriction, the city would also recognize that whether it's through our parks department or golf course or things like that, what are some of the things that we should be doing on our side to also lead our community in conserving water. And then finally, the policy outlines also what the city is going to do to notify residents and businesses at each stage along the way. So the policy and the bylaw, again, are really set up on these 4 stages. So what we have typically in Camrose is we're always in stage 1, which is a watch sort of scenario. At this instance here, it's all dealing with voluntary conservation. So we would encourage people to try and reduce water. We would be on the city side, we'd be putting out information in terms of here's some of the tips and tools that you can do to try and use less water within the community. But there's no mandatory requirements for conservation. And then also there's no fines or penalties that potentially would be involved. As we move into stage 2, then 3 and 4, that's when we would actually get into the mandatory water restrictions. And as we move through the different stages, those restrictions become more and more. The other main area that I wanted to talk about here today, and actually the title of the presentation itself, is the Water Shortage Response Plan. And so that's the remainder of the presentation. Before we get into the actual water shortage response plan, just thought it'd give a little bit of history on how water licensing works for Camrose. So the City of Camrose has a number of older licenses that are issued by the province to withdraw water from Dry Meat Lake. Based on the 3 older licenses, the city could have supported a population of approximately 25,000 people as compared to the current population of about 20,000. So now, as many of you are aware, water licensing within Alberta is based on the concept of first in time, first in right. And so as a result, some of these older licenses, they're fairly senior. Anything that has been issued since that time would be considered more junior. Now, the other thing that's of note is that those 3 older licenses, they really didn't have any specific or significant restrictions that were placed on the city by the province with respect to water conservation. Fast forward to about 2012, the city was approached by a major agricultural user, Cargill, about the possible construction of a canola crushing facility. Now, the canola crushing facility, which is now in operation and has been for a number of years, even though the facility itself really only has about 80 to 100 people on staff, they would have the water needs, the water demand equivalent to almost 3,500 people, and which obviously is very significant. So at that time, the city then resumed some discussions with the province on a previous water application that the city had to request some additional water from the Battle River watershed. And those discussions with the province were fairly positive, although the province did note that this newest license, if it was to be approved, would be quite junior as compared to other licenses that have already been approved within the Battle River watershed, and as a result would have some fairly significant water restrictions that would be imposed on the city. And so as a result, ultimately the province provided the city with what is known as a preliminary certificate, which is kind of like a promissory note for a new license. So right off the bat, the city did not receive the new license. We received a preliminary certificate, and that was issued to the city in 2013. And essentially that preliminary certificate outlined a number of different conditions that the city would have to satisfy first. And once those conditions were satisfied, then ultimately that would result in the province providing the city with a new license. So once it's been approved, once that new license would be approved, that would provide a bunch of additional water allocation for the city, both for municipal use as well as specifically for the Cargill facility. So in addition to Cargill's water needs, they would also allow the city to grow to a population of about 34,000, which is almost double of what the current population is. So there were really 2 main conditions that were imposed on through the preliminary certificate. One was the construction of a new pump station, which the city constructed shortly after 2013. And the secondly was the development of a water shortage response plan. That is a document that the city would put together to help us prepare for any potential water shortages in the event that there was a water shortage within the basin. And so now the city ultimately did satisfy those 2 conditions, and that then the province then rolled this preliminary certificate into a new water license. But because the older licenses whereas the older licenses did not have any significant water restrictions with respect to water use or water conservation, this newest license effectively allows the province to reduce the amount of water that the city can withdraw from the lake during the times of water shortage. And so the whole purpose of the water shortage response plan was to help the city to prepare for any future water restrictions that might be imposed by the province. Due to time constraints, I'm not going to get into the details of the plan very much, but just generally speaking, the water shortage response plan tries to build on the existing water conservation and water use bylaw and policy. It still has the 4 stages, the 4-stage approach to water shortage planning. And as you can see on the table, we've tried to set up the water shortage response plan based on the number of days of estimated number of days of water that was available still within Dry Meat Lake before the province potentially would impose those mandatory water restrictions. And so as the whole idea behind the water shortage response plan is that as we move through stage 1, 2, 3, and 4, we're trying to impose proactively water restrictions on our residents and on our businesses, so that if ever we got down to 0 days, which is essentially the time when there's still obviously water left in the lake, but it's at that time that the province potentially would impose a mandatory water restriction. Hopefully we've now eased our community into those changes, and so that we wouldn't be bearing the brunt all on that one day there. So in order for the city to determine what stage the water shortage response plan that the city should be in, what we did was developed a fairly simple but useful Excel spreadsheet that essentially models the flow going into the lake as well as going out of the lake. Now, of course, there's a lot of fairly sophisticated computer models that are potentially available, but what we did was we developed this Excel spreadsheet in-house using information that was available through various sources from the province, to help us to try and figure out, essentially what's happening with the lake there, how much water is available. And so essentially the Excel spreadsheet considers the flows that are going into the lake, which are, as you can see, are mainly precipitation and the flow in the Battle River upstream. And then we also try to consider the outputs from the lake, which is the city is the major draw from a municipal perspective, but we have evaporation, and then the fish ladder and the riparian gate, which were part of the downstream weir of the lake that the province installed in 2009. So by estimating the flows going into and out of the lake, we can estimate how quickly the lake is either filling or emptying, and that gives us an idea in terms of the number of days of water that are still available. Most of the information that we would use from the water are available from various public sources. And so we've got, for instance, the rivers.alberta.ca website on there. This is definitely a tool that we use on a regular basis. And so simply by just using your mouse, you can hover over top, click on a different monitoring station, and obtain real-time data on river flows or lake elevations. And so what we end up using that information is, this is a screen capture from the Excel spreadsheet. Basically, if we know what the city's water use is, if we know what the flow in the Battle River is, if we know what the lake elevation is as well, from there we can then determine or estimate the number of days that potentially would be available. And again, if we get down to 0, that doesn't mean that the lake is dry, but once we get down to 0, that's when the province would impose the mandatory restriction on that 4th license. And so the whole idea of this is to try and figure out a way of estimating the number of days, so that we can then start to impose restrictions on our community before things get down to critical levels. So depending on what the model kicks out in terms of number of days of storage remaining, we can then determine what stage of the plan we should be in. So how do we actually implement this? Well, so as I showed you there, the provincial website has information that you can freely access. As it turns out, the City of Camrose, for our various departments within the city, we provide a summary to our city manager of some of the major activities, whether it's construction projects or various other initiatives that are happening. And so our city manager then can compile this information and provide regular updates to our city council members. So since this weekly update was happening anyways, it provides a pretty simple process for us to be able to provide regular weekly updates to our city manager. And that allows him to know whether we should be changing from stage 1 of the plan to one of the more advanced stages of the plan. So the plan itself was approved by council in 2017, and it was submitted to the province in that same year. That allowed that preliminary certificate to roll into the new license. So since that time, there's been a couple of instances of note. Later in that year of fall of 2017, we did get to the point where the amount of water available within the lake warranted us to go from stage 1 to stage 2 of the plan. However, because it was fairly late in the year, we were already starting to see cooling temperatures. The grass was starting to go dormant. It really didn't make sense at that point to impose the stage 2 restrictions, which a lot of those restrictions are dealing with outdoor water use anyways. Summer of 2018, we actually did move to stage 2 of our water shortage response plan. And since that time, we've been fortunate enough to have enough summer rainfalls to only stay in stage 1, which is that voluntary conservation. But it is something obviously that's still available to us that we can use as we move into 2024 and beyond. And then the last thing I just wanted to say here is the actual water shortage response plan. It's 7 years old. It's done us well. Definitely, there's things that we could have done differently or things that we potentially would be looking at doing. And so, for instance, there's newer resources and guidelines that are available, such as the manual that you can see over on the right from the Alberta Water Council. Keep in mind that guide, the guideline there, was published almost 4 years after we finalized our water shortage response plan. And so there's definitely things in there, such as considering multi-year droughts, water sharing agreements, expanding some of our water restrictions that we could have done at that time. But I think the next major review of the water shortage response plan is definitely going to consider that. This is definitely something that is ongoing. These discussions are happening with our city council, although the council has not specifically told us to proceed with any major update at this time. But we anticipate that's going to be something that's going to be front of mind in 2024. And with that, I'm happy to be available to answer any questions people might have. Thanks for your time.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy. That was really interesting. And since you guys have had the water shortage in place for quite a few years, you've had I suppose, the benefit in a way of getting to test it to see how it works in the time of a water shortage. So I'd be curious at a later time to find out how well the water restrictions, how effective they were when you got to test it in 2018, and how well your community kind of responded to that. But I think we'll go into a couple of questions here. We are kind of at the end of the time, but I'm sure we could take one or two. What do you think, Jill?
Yeah, I think we got a moment to ask a couple. One was actually from Michelle. She's asking about question for Rob about your slide where it says no glaciers. She's wondering, does this mean that the glacier contribution was not included in the model, or that there would be no more glacial contribution by 2051?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we had two land cover scenarios that we could run, and we ran both as part of our modeling exercise in the roadmap development. So one is current glacier conditions, and the second is no glacier conditions. So we couldn't model like a great glacial retreat. It's particularly important in the Bow River Basin because glacial contribution at the late summer flow at least is kind of between 5 to 7%, something like that. So as temperatures heat up, obviously you get that becomes a higher contribution. So it makes a difference. So because our modeling exercise in this wasn't really to predict the future, we were trying to stress the system. So we took our no land cover, no glacier coverage scenario and applied that going forward. The unfortunate reality is by 2051 to 80, we may not have glaciers. So it may not be that unrealistic, which is kind of sad, but maybe in the short term, it's really slightly pessimistic as a scenario to run. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it definitely does. That's really interesting. I think the glacial contribution for the North Saskatchewan River is even less, so it's interesting to know. But yeah, I think we're top of the hour, 1 o'clock, so maybe we'll wrap it up, and I'll just announce our winner was Raquel Farrow for the prize, and I just messaged you, so yeah, just give me your information and we'll get it sent to you.
Yeah. Always happy when people are happy. Great. Well, thank you so much. Big thanks to our speakers, Jeremy and Robert. for coming and telling us about your projects. So today's recording will be available online here. Check out our YouTube channel, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out our website for more information, and subscribe to our Instagram newsletter, where you can find out more information about our forthcoming next webinars. So great. Thank you to everybody for coming today, and we really appreciate your participation and your time. Thanks so much.